Dear Maryanne, for teachers, your seventh letter is particularly important since it is often at the age of 5 or 6 when we first enter the lives of our students and spend a great deal of time with them. I love the title of this letter, The Science and Poetry in Learning and Teaching to Read. I think the title conveys the practice of teaching reading as we incorporate the science and research that informs us about how to teach and learn reading. But it also conveys the nature of teaching and learning to read and the poetry and art that instills a sense of beauty and wonder in the words, sentences, and stories we read and teach our students to read. Your quote from William James is so apt. Children who learn to read take flight into whole new worlds as effortlessly as young birds. As teachers, this is our ultimate goal to usher our children along their first flights into magical realms of imagination, to envision themselves as Harry Potter, Ron, or Hermione, wielding their magic wands to fend off all manner of dangerous entities, or to picture themselves as a young Tutankhamun or a child in Africa designing windmills for his village, or a young Mary entering the secret garden for the first time. However, as you point out, the ability to take flight as readers is not nearly so easy for far too many of our nation's children. As you write, for all too many children, the walk through the kindergarten door is the beginning of a recurrent nightmare that is invisible to almost everyone else. Depending on which scenario they experience, either children will have their own shot at the elusive American dream or they will not, with far reaching consequences for everyone in society. The No Child Left Behind legislation, implemented nearly 25 years ago, embraced a very ambitious goal of having every child reading at grade level by the end of third grade. It was a noble goal, but it didn't take long to realize that it was unrealistic to think that education policy alone could break down the societal barriers that impede students in their educational lives. Children who do not benefit from all the things that compose the ideal reading life you described in your previous letter enter school behind their more fortunate classmates who have benefited from far more ideal literacy experiences and are, from day one, subjected to a steady stream of intervention lessons that may or may not be appropriate in meeting their individual needs. Teachers understand that the diversity of the students in their classrooms is, well, diverse and extends beyond race, nationality, religious or cultural identities, language, and gender. Students enter the classroom with a vast array of experiences and backgrounds that impact their educational lives. There has been a vast amount of research on the effect of socioeconomic status on literacy learners and the negative impact of poverty on students. Ameliorating this impact has been the focus of school reform efforts in the United States since 1965 with President Lyndon B. Johnson's Elementary and Secondary Education Act, a key component of his administration's war on poverty. As much as education reform initiatives like No Child Left Behind have targeted reading instruction, there has been an equal amount of focus on providing resources for communities, schools, and children who live with scarce resources. Of course, this acknowledgement of the need to address poverty as a barrier to educational success is laudatory and necessary, particularly when we are in an almost constant mode of measuring educational outcomes and achievement. But perhaps inadvertently, or as an unintended consequence of education reform initiatives over the past decades, as you write, Our society has gradually handed over to teachers, arguably its most idealistic members, all the ills that society itself could not fix, particularly the pernicious effects of poverty and stressful environments on early child development. Preparing teachers to enter a profession that encompasses so much diversity, contextual, cultural, and social challenges is, at the very least, complex. I agree with you when you write, knowing how to introduce all children with their many differences to the reading life today is as complex a set of knowledge bases as any engineer, rocket scientist, or saint is ever called upon to use. And the challenges are increasing rapidly as teachers face ever more scrutiny and criticism from many sectors of society. Some teachers become disheartened and feel disrespected as they try their very best to meet the demands of scripted curricula to be implemented with fidelity, disapproval of books they may wish to read to their students, and all the while trying with all their might to meet the needs of their students. Thank you for your section entitled The Debate That Should Never Have Been. I'm struck by the fact that you wrote this section 7 or 8 years ago, just prior to the latest volley in the reading wars, now through the science of reading movement, that berates teachers for not knowing how to teach reading. The science of reading movement is very, very powerful, with financial backers and investors with a ready solution for low reading achievement. If only school districts purchase a select number of prepackaged programs and state legislative mandates to adopt programs endorsed by the science of reading movement, while eliminating other programs and methodologies. It's disheartening, to say the least, for teachers in schools as well as those who teach in teacher preparation programs. Because the reality is that the science that informs us about how to teach reading should not be reduced to a movement or a set of products or an ideology. Rather, we should look to science as it increasingly provides research that enables us to meet the needs of young literacy learners with greater precision and efficacy. You cite the research by scholars at the McGovern Institute for Brain Research at MIT and Boston Children's Hospital with over 1,000 kindergarten students. This research is impactful in that it identified 6 different developmental profiles that can assist teachers and parents in understanding how to provide what various students need in order to develop cognitively. I think the most important thing for teachers to understand and embrace is that the ability to identify students' developmental profiles and needs very early can enable us to draw on the strengths of our students and abandon the bifurcated practices associated with ongoing assessments designed to continually label young learners based on what is perceived as deficits in their learning. Yes, assessment is important because it informs what and how we teach, but when time devoted to assessment encroaches on the time we need for actual teaching, it needs to be reconsidered. I've noticed that over the past 20 plus years, and in particular since the reading wars were reignited with the science of reading movement, that the reading curriculum has become more narrow and more prescribed than ever before. It's a shame that teachers and administrators are forced to take sides, and in taking sides, often have to give up some of what we hold dear in teaching young children to read and the joyful literacy experiences that motivate children to want to continue as literacy learners. Adrian Johns, author of the excellent book, The Science of Reading Information, Media, and Mind in Modern America, suggests that breaking the juggernaut created by the perpetuation of ideological wars about reading instruction might be possible if a spirit of curiosity is employed when considering the science and research that informs us about early reading. He points out that we shouldn't simply think about how reading was taught in the past as something akin to disastrous, because, as he explains, previous approaches to teaching reading did, in fact, generate real readers and some great writers, too. He goes on to explain that we may think about how such knowledge and methods have been decided upon in prior contexts and consider them not only in terms of one dimensional scale of success and failure, a linear measure of ability at a defined skill, but also in those of more sophisticated, multidimensional questions of what kind of reading and community they have given rise to. We can wonder how they have contributed to the formation and transformation of cultures. Neuroscientist Stanislaus Dehaene adds clarity to how we should envision the role of teachers as those on the front lines of reading research and implementation of reading science. He insightfully describes the role of brain imaging in research that examines the science of reading. He explains that experimental psychologists establish the parameters of the research protocols in brain imaging research studies. In the classroom, however, he asserts, teachers are at the helm. Neuroscientists working with researchers in the fields of psychology and pedagogy hold the promise of scientific consensus on the mechanisms of literacy development and research on reading instruction. Dehaene calls this neuropsychopedagogy as an integrated and cumulative approach where teacher autonomy is safeguarded, but instruction is aimed toward a pragmatic search for efficient strategies. And to this, I give a resounding amen. There is so much rich and informative research about how we can create a generation of readers who are capable of engaging in deep reading as lifelong learners. And we know that the process of developing readers begins early, and ameliorating the negative impacts of poverty needs to begin early as well. Nobel Prize winning economist James Heckman of the University of Chicago conservatively estimates that the rate of return for the 3 and 4-year-old children who participated in the Perry Preschool Project in Ypsilanti, Michigan, a program that focused on disadvantaged children in the 1960s, to be 5.8%. And another national study conducted by the State Early Childhood Policy Technical Assistance Network estimated that the total return on investment for the Perry Preschool program was even higher. For every $1 spent intervening in these disadvantaged children's lives, $8.74 was saved in the form of lower societal costs for governmental assistance, special education, and costs associated with crime. I'll close my letter with your quote from Martha Nussbaum's Cultivating Humanity. Education for world citizenship needs to begin early. As soon as children engage in storytelling, they can tell stories about other lands and other peoples. They can learn that religions other than Judaism and Christianity exist, that people have many traditions and ways of thinking. As children explore stories, rhymes, and songs, especially in the company of the adults they love, they are led to notice the suffering of other living creatures with a new keenness. That, I think, is the power of literacy in the lives of all of us. the reason teaching literacy is so crucial for our children, and why we must be diligent as teachers in developing expertise in teaching reading in the earliest years of their educational lives. Thank you, Maryanne. I look forward to reading your 8th letter, Building a Biliterate Brain. Until then, we remain your devoted readers, the teachers.